Ever get the feeling you're being watched? Turns out you probably are. From security cameras enhanced with facial recognition to automatic license plate readers and smart doorbell cameras, mass surveillance has become mainstream. Is our data, though, being weaponized without our consent? And if so, is that a price worth paying for greater safety? It's up for debate on Counterpoints with me, Melinda Nusafora. This doorbell camera vision was arguably the first major breakthrough in the high-profile investigation into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, the mother of prominent US journalist Savannah Guthrie. But it also raised a lot of questions. The Guthries didn't subscribe to or consent to the company recording, collecting or storing their data. And yet, here it is. During ICE operations in the US, agents openly admitted to using facial recognition tech not only to track undocumented migrants, but also to record protesters and regular citizens. AI data companies such as Palantir say their tech is making our lives safer and easier. Critics argue it encroaches on civil liberties and erodes democracy. On this episode, we'll ask, are we living in a surveillance state? Where is the line between surveillance for safety and weaponizing data? And is it all necessary to win the current tech arms race? Stay with us. Joining us for this discussion is Dr. Rumman Chowdhury, CEO and founder of Humane Intelligence and a former United States Science Envoy for Artificial Intelligence during the Biden administration. And Joey Munoz is with us, Strategic Political Advisor and military veteran. Welcome to Counterpoints, both of you. Well, the use of facial recognition and tracking software during ICE raids in the US has reopened a debate about mass surveillance. Data and analytics company Palantir has been contracted to work with the US Department of Immigration and Customs Enforcement since the Obama administration. So why the extraordinary outcry now? Some argue it's not the tech itself that's new, but rather how it's being deployed that feels different this time around. Companies such as Palantir say while they aren't responsible for government policy, they do believe they're making society safer. So Joey, let me ask you first of all, are we living in a surveillance state? And if so, is that necessarily a bad thing?
I don't think we're living in a surveillance state. I think surveillance state would indicate, or at least imply, that we're being mass surveilled all the time. I don't necessarily know that that's quite the case. But technology is a tool that we can utilize to stay safer. And I think Palantir is probably one of the leading companies that's doing this at the moment. And so I applaud their efforts to help the government's directives in deportation, as well as keeping our borders safe and secure. So no, I don't believe so.
Rumman, what do you think?
I think we absolutely do live in a technology-enabled surveillance state. We all carry devices that, to an extent we have never seen in our lives, point at where we are and what we are doing at every moment in our day. We have devices that are able to track everything from our minute purchases and then refeed them to us as ads or outcomes in our algorithms. So a surveillance state isn't just a government-enabled surveillance state. We're not talking about drones on streets and cops on corners. We're talking about a surveillance state that is technology that is able to track active and passive data, and I really emphasize the passive data because that's the one that people don't realize, actually is quite informative. And I'll give you some examples of a surveillance state. We now have companies offering employers tools profile individuals based on their internet activity, purchase behavior, and social media behavior, so that they proactively have a pre-developed assumption of who you are before you even apply for a job. So for certain people, that means that you are already out of the running before you've even entered a race.
What do you make of that assessment, Joey? I mean, it sounds a little bit more nefarious than maybe your assessment.
No, I mean, it sounds nefarious, but a lot of that's is corporation. I think we're going to find a lot of overlap in probably our opinions is corporations' use of technology, not necessarily government's use of technology, and enforcing the law. And that's something where, like, I personally agree. I think that corporations vastly overreach in their use of technology and trying to gain insights and glean nuggets of information they can about consumers, and where consumers need to be a little bit more informed, as well as they need to be a little bit more regulated in some capacities when it comes to consumer protection. But again, I don't know that it's necessarily the government's. It's the government doing this. It's not necessarily. And again, like her visual of, like, drones on street corners and things like that. Like, no, I don't, aside from the random Amazon drone delivering a package, but I don't think that we're quite going to get to that point, at least with this administration.
Well, I mean, I don't know if we need to get to that point. I think a lot of your original question was also about why now? Why not in the Obama administration? And I think it points to one of the fears of a surveillance state, which is actually administration agnostic, that it is predicated upon having a functional democracy that is authorized by the people. And now there are plenty of people in the United States who don't think the current administration is an authorized entity or performing in the best interests of the general public. So really the controversy is about the surveillance state that was enabled by the Obama administration, but enacted an administration that people believe are using the systems unfairly and in many cases illegally.
But where is that line, though, between surveillance and safety, Joey? Is there a concern that whether it's a corporation, whether it's a government, that personal data is being weaponized without people's consent?
So I think kind of the baseline for a lot of that would say that security tools must be used responsibly. But I think, moreover, that modern problems require modern solutions, right? So there is a fine line to do that. And I think as long as, at least in the United States, constitutional protections are being adhered to, then I think that's as far as the government goes, right? From a government perspective. Corporations, that's what they can pass laws to fix a lot of those things. But as far as government policy goes, I think that they do need to adhere to constitutionally protected rights of citizens. And there's no exception or workaround around that. In my opinion, I don't think there should be. I think that all constitutional rights should be protected, privacy included in all of those. Anyway, yeah, yes. So that's kind of where that stands.
Rumman, what do you think? I mean, who decides on that line between surveillance for safety and surveillance that encroaches people's, civil liberties?
Yeah, I'll speak more as a political scientist than a technologist and say that that line is just a function of the level of democracy in the country and the legitimacy of the government and power. What is the difference between, a kind of surveillance state that's been led by an autocratic regime and a kind of surveillance state in a more citizen-approved, democratized regime is literally that, is citizen-approved democracy. And then, again, this is not for me to decide or for anybody else to decide. It's really just it should be based on what the United States is built on, public consensus. And now there's quite strong, in certain pockets of the country and increasing all over the country, public concern about the overreach of the current government. And the thing about these kinds of surveillance tools is they build an infrastructure. That infrastructure cannot be rolled back. So we cannot just pull it back when we say, oh, actually, this is a government that's overreaching, and oh, you can have more because this is a government that's not overreaching. And not only can it not work that way, we don't even have the visibility or protections to work that way, right? So so we can agree that there is corporate overreach and it's different for the government. We have tools and mechanisms to protect us from corporate overreach. We don't necessarily have the tools and mechanisms at play now, or at the very least, those tools are being quite stifled by the current administration to exercise our right to say, we think that there is overreach happening by the government. There is nothing wrong or unconstitutional with saying that. In fact, that is protected by the Constitution.
Joey, do you think that?
Yeah, I would. Oh, go ahead.
No, please go ahead with your thought.
So I think that when technology, so I think the biggest thing right now is that technology is being largely used to enforce the law, right? And that's where a lot of the political divide comes from at the moment. Is that the current administration, Trump administration, is enforcing what has been on the law, the laws that have been on the books for bipartisan laws, I might add, that have been on the books for a very long time. They're utilizing technology to help execute those laws in ways that haven't been done in a very long time, and they're utilizing infrastructure that came in under the Obama administration. And so this isn't like a new development. It's just simply it's actually being done for the first time. And I think that where we look at technology and the use that it helps speed things up. We can analyze more data. We can look at more things. We can significantly remove the burden from some of the federal agencies that need to be doing their jobs on the ground and make their job a whole heck of a lot easier. And I think that's where the majority of Americans right now is. They just want the laws enforced, which is why I think you see such broad approval. There are pockets of people that don't agree with that for whatever reason. But I think moreover, I think most Americans support this administration's use of technology and enforcing of longstanding immigration law.
Well, actually, this country has the highest disapproval rate of the current president that we've had in a very, very long time. And, I don't think it is a correct assessment that these laws are simply being enforced. They are being enforced and targeted in the places and states and cities that the current administration, the president, does not like. And this is not me speculating that. He has said that, right? I live in Texas, and it is very interesting to go around in Texas, which should be a state that is highly targeted by the administration, and see the huge difference between the level of militarization in Chicago and Minneapolis versus in many cities in Texas. So if this law were actually being applied equally all over the country to simply implement laws that are written in the Obama administration that were never applied before, then theoretically, we should not be seeing as much in particular pockets of states. We should be seeing significantly more in, like the place I live in Houston, Texas, than we are seeing happening in other parts of the country. So it's not a law that's being applied equitably, equally. So this is where I'm starting to get it. Like, what citizens are pushing back against is not necessarily the existence of the law and its application, and also, I don't know if I agree with the fact that it is only being applied lawfully. I'll also add that just because a law exists doesn't mean it's right or good. I think plenty of people had issues and problems with the laws when they were written during the Obama administration. So, I'm not trying to give that administration a free pass at all. One of the reasons why it hasn't been applied to its fullest extent is actually because a lot of people don't think these laws are fair and just. And again, technology, going back to the conversation at hand about technology, it enables a momentum that we cannot undo. We cannot undo the surveillance theater that started post 9/11, even though we saw very little to no benefit to it. And in fact, we actually see erosion of trust in government institutions as a result of it. But again, these are things that are very, very difficult to roll back once they've been given away.
Rumman, do you think, though, it's the policy, or do you think it's the way technology is being used to implement the policy? I ask because there have been protests around Palantir saying that they have too much power and too much integration and connection with the government. Do you see that as an issue, or do you think it's purely just people rallying against a policy?
I think it's a bit of both, and I think here's where the two of us start to agree in that Palantir is actually not a government entity. It is a privately owned corporation and its founders have incredibly interesting concepts of what democracy should look like. And one of my concerns here is that all of what we cannot divorce at this point a private corporation that is building these tools and collecting and housing this data and running these operations and assisting these entities, government entities, with the government and policy. And again, I want to say, one can disagree with the current government. That is a part of the conversation, but it is fundamentally the policies that technology is enabling. And again, as the technology is enabled, it is not as simple as simply repealing a law or rolling back an application. The technology develops an infrastructure of data collection and data use that is quite dangerous and also unaccountable to the American public. I think that is one of the biggest and most important parts of this is none of us on this call literally know exactly what Palantir is doing and what the US government are doing with them. And the people who do know are not at liberty to speak about it. So actually we can sit here and debate and speculate, but we can agree with the fact that we literally have zero idea what this corporation is doing with all of our data information and what the government is doing with all of our data information.
Joey?
So I have several thoughts. So I want to go back a second to address a point that she made on Texas versus Minnesota or some of these. Texas is cooperating. The state of Texas and the cities within Texas, even the ones that are democratically controlled, are cooperating with ICE and border patrol. They're cooperating. That's why you're not seeing the level that you're seeing in cities like Minneapolis, for instance, which aren't cooperating and now have slowly started to cooperate. And so you're seeing a drawdown of law enforcement officials, federal law enforcement officials anyway, in places like that. And I think that's an important point to make, that the reason why you're seeing, and we're targeting the president and his administration are going into those cities because they're not cooperating with federal law enforcement officials, and they're not enforcing federal immigration law where they ought to be. And so I think that's a big part of that. Now, I think part of, and you're correct when you said that none of us have insight into some of these things, but that's what Congress is supposed to be doing. That's what congressional oversight should be looking at these things and should be taking some of these things into consideration and passing laws to be able to give us insight into what Palantir is doing, and moreover, they can be, and in some cases they are. The Homeland Security Committee regularly calls and has recently even just called Homeland Security before their committee to testify. And while I think that Republicans in Congress are probably not going to be nearly as aggressive towards the administration officials that say Democrats would be, but the Democrats don't ask these questions either, and they haven't, because it would call into question what happened during the last administration and why wasn't this not a problem when President Biden's administration was deporting millions of people. And again, I think largely it's just because it's President Trump. I think a lot of this boils down to people just they don't like him, regardless of what the policy is. He could cure cancer and it wouldn't matter as much just because it's him. I don't think that's a fair factor of that.
I don't think that's a fair assessment at all. President Trump could cure cancer, and I would gladly applaud him, as would many people, including the protesters in Minneapolis. What we are seeing is President Trump specifically pointing fingers at individuals, using thinly veiled coded terminology about certain types of people, and saying he will go after them. He actually uses phrases and terminology to talk about people he dislikes, right? And then he will say, I'm going to come after you. And then he sends the military after them. That is not how the president's supposed to operate, right? So, Houston actually Houston is not always cooperating. And again, I'm saying that as somebody who lives there, are actually active protests against ICE in my town of Katy, Texas, and in parts of Houston. That does not actually mean that the government can respond with disproportionate force and kill and shoot people. That does not mean that the president can then raise his own private army of people, pay them disproportionately to do his bidding, and then sick them on American citizens.
Not a private army. It's a federal agency. It's not a private army. It's a federal agency. It's a federal law enforcement agency that's been around for 20 plus years.
He's paying them at a level, and you served in the military, right? My partner also served in the military. The salaries they are receiving, the bonuses these completely unqualified people are receiving is astronomical compared to what the military gets paid. It is quite a lot of money for people who are there just to walk around on the streets and intimidate citizens.
He's not sending in the military. They're sending law enforcement agencies.
Right, he's
federal
not
law
sending in the
enforcement
military.
agency. He didn't raise a private army. He's not. They're enforcing laws that have been around for a long time,
because
for
if
20
he is the
plus years.
president, it is fear. And
if I can bring it back to the technology aspect of what they're doing, though, Joey, can I ask you, what do you make, though, of the people who are concerned that perhaps Palantir has too much power? That, okay, there should be, Congress should be passing laws to allow people to know what they're doing with that data, but in the absence of it, are they too powerful right now?
I don't believe so. I don't think that they're too powerful. Do I think they're a powerful company, much like Raytheon or Boeing or any of the other defense companies and contractors, not particularly. I think in this particular area, they are quite a powerful company. I think they have too much power. I guess that's largely, we could debate that they are or aren't. I look at what's happening with Anthropic and the CEO being upset that his technology was being used by Palantir to do this, and like the ramification of that is to now to issue a blanket stop or to list them as hostile to the supply chain for the defense sector, which means that the ramification of that would be that their technology isn't used across the federal government, right? So that's if they feel that way, if a company feels that their technology is being used that, but if citizens do that, petition Congress. That's what Congress is for. Or you can protest. I'm not saying don't go out and protest because you don't like something.
Well, the president says I can't go out and
do it lawfully and do it.
Something.
That's not true at all. He just says don't be violent, don't attack law enforcement officers. He does not. The president has never said go out and attack people. No, he hasn't.
No.
If law enforcement is getting attacked, and if law enforcement is being,
he certainly does not like it or invite it, right?
Okay.
And actually, so one thing I will say we do wildly agree on is that the Democrats could be doing a hell of a lot more in Congress. But I will bring it back to the technology.
Yeah, because I want to ask you, Rumman.
As we have been instructed to. Yeah. So I do want to point out that there is a fundamental difference between like a Boeing and a Raytheon and a Palantir, right? Because a Palantir is collecting personal data about us in a way that a Boeing and a Raytheon does not. They're powerful in very, very different ways. I think the thing that is scary about technology, and in particular what we're talking about is algorithmic oversight. So it's not just technology writ large, it's predictive models, predictive algorithms. We can talk a little bit more about the technology itself, right? The predictive technology is not as good as it is often pitched as being, right? So some of the earliest Palantir implementations in places like Los Angeles and New Orleans and, through the NHS system really did not create trustworthy and useful systems. It created predictive models of policing that were largely just wrong. It did not reduce crime in these areas. And again, and especially in New Orleans and in Los Angeles, the issue people had is that they had no right and no say over whether or not this technology was introduced into their lives. And in particular in New Orleans, citizens did not want the technology, but they found out after the fact, and they only found out because of a fluke, because it was accidentally brought up in a meeting that, and again, they were not necessarily afforded, nor were they legally required to be informed that this technology is being used. And I think that is the core of what people are concerned about when we talk about a surveillance state. It's, like we can disagree on the administration, et cetera, but, it is important to take it beyond the administration, because I do agree that the Obama administration should not have, made these, made this kind of technology and passed these kinds of laws, right? And, maybe if we were in a totally different administration where, you felt like your rights were being trampled on and you were being targeted, you might feel that as well. But in a sense, it almost doesn't matter because there's nothing I can do and there's nothing people can do. And I think that's the part that's concerning, the redress, the oversight. And petitioning Congress, that we know how functional this government is right now and whether or not any of that's going to pass and happen, right? I wish that is what we could do. I wish it is, but I know it's not. It's not. It would not go anywhere.
Joey, what do you make of the idea that, companies have always been included in, weaponized tech, private companies have always had that sort of relationship with government. Is it different because Palantir is using civilian data?
I don't believe so. I could see where that. So when she talks about like the algorithm, like they're using algorithms to do this, I think there's risk that exists. Of course, there is always risk. But I think that the risk of falling behind our adversaries who aren't slowing down and aren't having conversations like this is a far greater risk than anything than the other thing. Now we can argue that Congress isn't doing their jobs. We can argue that they should be more proactive in oversight and legislation. And that local towns and cities should be more vocal in how they're utilizing technology in New Orleans or in Los Angeles. Although I'd like to point out, like from a political standpoint, those are two massively democratic cities. And so, I think that there's a lot more. a lot more communication that should be happening, and I think people should have more say. I mean, I'm big on sovereignty, and I think that people should have a lot more protection than they have now. I live in the EU, and one of the great things I like about living in the EU, although there's not very many these days, but one of the things I like is consumer protection. I think that the EU does a fantastic job of consumer protection, and I've said it on numerous programs on panels across the world. I think that we should be more informed as consumers, and not in the lip service way where like, oh, click this checkbox and you're fine, but you didn't actually read the fine print, and those things don't actually change anything. I think there should be a way, there should be a method for people to address these grievances that isn't just, write a strongly worded letter to Congress or take to the streets and protest. There should be a path forward for that. But moreover, do I think that they have your question was, do they think they have too much power? I don't think they have too much power. I think they have a lot of power at the moment. And I think that the governments, the people that we've elected, have given them power, and perhaps it might be in our best interest to take some of that power back away from government if we're so willing to give it away. And I think that could be a conversation that we could probably come to some consensus on, that perhaps that if we're worried about government giving corporations too much power, perhaps we, the people, have given our government far too much power.
I would agree with you. And actually, like, since you raised the EU, the Swiss government recently backed out of a contract with Palantir because Palantir's methods of their products and their methods simply could not adhere to Swiss data protection and privacy protection law. Like, literally, their products are incompatible. How they work are incompatible with the law. And I think that speaks volumes. And I agree with you. I think one of the biggest problems is that there is no in between. Either it's this sort of facile, like, call your senator and curse at his poor staffer, or go out in the street, and we don't have an in between. I think one of the Democratic Party is having our Tea Party moment. Like, we are deeply, deeply frustrated with our leadership. I do think that this is a pivotal moment for the party, but also we lack the political protections, laws, and infrastructure, and part of it, and I think there's a lot of states in the United States grappling with this, is we don't have adequate protection. What does protection even look like? The other part I'll add is we don't have the reflex as Americans to take advantage of privacy. Let's say we had GDPR in America, right? It is so incompatible with the way American life is. We don't even know what it would mean to say, I want the right to not be found. It is out of the realm of understanding of most Americans at this point. And that's sad, right? So whether or not I should be able to execute that, right? Maybe other people are totally fine with, Palantir having their data, et cetera, doing what they want with it because they think it contributes to a better and safer society. And I agree, they're allowed to have that perspective, but right now it actually seems like it doesn't matter what your perspective is, right? The company's going to do what they want to do, the government's going to do what they want to do. And that's really the point of frustration, is our individual right to exercise liberties over how things about us are being used against us and used in different ways without us even knowing often.
I'm going to move us on to the next segment of our debate, because we're going to start running out of time. And you raised something, Joey, that I want to add. And you can pick up on what Rumman has said as we move on. You mentioned that our adversaries aren't slowing down when it comes to technology, because I want to bring in this concept of a technology arms race. A few weeks ago, we heard from Palantir's Executive Vice President for Europe and the UK, who said that the company was founded, and I quote, "so the West could win." And it was a nod to this era of competition that we're in between the West and China, but also when you bear in mind that Palantir has contracts to work with the governments of Ukraine and Israel against Russia and Hamas respectively. So if we take morality out of the equation and look at this as an issue of a country exerting strength, then it certainly makes sense for companies to develop and enhance capabilities for their countries. So Rumman, I'll ask you first, and then I'll hand it to you, Joey. Is it too Western-centric to assume that it is in everyone's global interest that America or American companies win this race?
I think that is a very unique and American perspective. It's not even a Western perspective, it's an American perspective because we do see the rise of sovereign AI. We see the EU investing a lot of money in building its own technology, building its own stack. France has really led the way with that, and now we see companies like Mistral, right, popping up. I'm in India right now for the India AI Summit. India is also coming out as a very, very big contender. And India is an interesting one to look at because if you look at the themes of the India AI Summit, it is not about world dominance or the East over the West. It is actually about prosperity, flourishing, happiness, maybe things that sound a little bit silly to us in the West because we are so used to saying we have to have a hard line narrative. Saying something like the purpose of AI is prosperity and happiness for all sounds weak. And yet that is one of the themes of the India Summit. And don't get me wrong, like Narendra Modi has also implemented one of the broadest and most contested surveillance states in the world. So it's actually a very, very interesting narrative that, and I know that, Alex Karp has actually come out and said that about the West winning. Eric Schmidt is also a big part of that kind of narrative. I think it paints the world in a way that A, is not true. I will also add, not on top of the conversation about India, that China has actually implemented some of the strongest responsible use and responsible AI protections of just about any country. And yes, we can say they're a state-controlled economy, there's a lot of state surveillance, et cetera. But it is interesting to say that, to see how they are implementing responsible use and thinking about how technology can be used responsibly. So it is a complex narrative, no matter what country you're in, and painting the other side as simplistic or evil, and then our side as, complicated and dealing with difficult questions, ignores the fact that everybody's dealing with these complicated questions.
Joey, what's your point of view? And also feel free to circle back to Rumman's previous response that I know you wanted to comment on.
I can't remember what I wanted to say now, because he gives a lot of good stuff. So I'm going to kind of go up a level. America first, and the Trump administration policy is putting the United States first in issues related to the U.S. government, right? That does not mean that France can't be first, or with relation to French politicians. I think that the president of France and the prime minister of France should put France first. I think the Italian prime minister and president should put Italy first. I think that every country's elected government should, their prime directive should be to put their own countries first and to work where it makes sense with other countries where their values and their heritage and their ideals and what they want to do moving forward, where those things align, whether that's with technology, military, energy, infrastructure. You pick a topic, like Secretary Rubio's in Hungary and just signed a big nuclear energy deal in Hungary. But we're also looking at South America and doing similar things there. So I don't necessarily think that it just because we want them to use our technology or utilize our businesses or take advantage of that they can't be focused internally, right? So I was at a conference a few weeks ago, or a couple months ago now at this point, where there was a lot of talk about technology sovereignty in Europe, right? And I think the main issue that Europe's going to have, and so right now it's use American tech or use what exactly? And so I would love nothing more, and I think the administration, at least several officials have said something similar, is to see Europe have its own options to do things and be a strong partner on the global stage. The issue is that they don't possess the funding. They haven't spent as much money. They don't have enough energy. And so we get into a conversation that diverges greatly from technology and from AI. And we start looking at energy independence. We start looking at infrastructure. We start looking at regulation. I think there's a lot of regulation in the EU that is hindering viable technology companies from actually succeeding. And they're punitively trying to crush American companies at the expense of additional European companies at the same time. So they're making a kind of a hostile playing field for everybody by trying to penalize American companies. And so I would love nothing more than to see more companies succeed. But at the moment, there aren't other options, right? You want the best fighter jet in the world, you buy the F-35. Period. If there was another option, other people will start buying that other option. But at the moment, that's the best there is. And right now, American tech is the best that there is. So if there's an option out there, if people want to develop their own tech, if India or France or Italy or Japan want to develop their own tech and not be so reliant and have their own sovereign technology stacks, I think that they should. I think that every country should put their own sovereignty first and be able to control their own destiny. And I think the administration largely parrots that all the time. They would love to see strong militaries, energy independent countries throughout the West. So I think that mostly answers most of those
But
questions.
Joey, let me put this to you though. When we see a rivalry between, say, China and the United States, and it looks like China may, get a bit of a technology upper hand, it's used then against them by the Trump administration. So in that sense, it doesn't seem like he wants a China that can compete with America on the technology front. He wants to keep China down so that they aren't a competitor. Isn't that how things really stand?
That's how everybody perceives everyone. Like China's doing the same thing to the United States. It's not a zero, like it's not a one-off thing. The United States has been disadvantaged in a lot of different areas over the last 30, 40 years that are finally starting to get sorted out now. So yeah, they are a peer, right? And so I think the world is moving from into basically a multipolar world of which every region has strong players and there's influence there. But it would be silly to think that the president of the United States wouldn't want the United States to be in the strongest possible position it could be in. And I think that's the case. And where I think that the U.S. can exert influence in other countries and leverage the economic strength of the United States to get them to do business or adopt U.S. technologies. And I think that's better for the United States, obviously. And largely over the last 75 years, that's been a winning proposition for most of the countries of Europe when it comes to security guarantees and things like that. So yes, I mean, he's doing that at the detriment of China. But they do the exact same thing to us in Africa and the Middle East and throughout Asia. So it's not like it's the only people doing this is the Trump administration. That's simply just not the case.
Well, so I'd like to interject with let's imagine a world in which this technology was never built along geopolitical lines. And that was largely the technology world that we had, right? The internet did not have borders until China created them, right? And the concept of the splinternet was one of the most discussed and concerning things to the average person who paid attention to technology, because the internet was supposed to be this, independent of government, independent of any sort of external influence, beautiful thing that existed. And theoretically, AI could have been the same. But for some reason, out of the gate, and not for some reason, it's because it has immense economic potential, it just got captured along these geopolitical lines. So I think the narrative of sovereign AI is both good and bad. It is good on face because, there are countries around the world saying, hey, we missed out on the first 3 waves of technology innovations. And as a result, all of this wealth and power are not just located in the United States, it gets sucked out of our countries, right? So one sees that argument on face and they're like, yeah, we should have competition. But then there's a part of this where this race to the bottom that is going to benefit these very, very powerful people and very, very powerful corporations and whoever the CEO will be of the European equivalent of OpenAI and the Chinese equivalent of OpenAI and the Singaporean equivalent of Anthropic. And we have to take a step back and say, is this actually leading to a better world for the average person? Because there is a race to the bottom, right? And the race to the bottom is not necessarily a given. And I do worry that we assume that it is. The boogeyman argument is the best way to come to the worst world possible. And that is what I worry about. So at what point can we take a step back? Or maybe that ship has sailed. And honestly, largely, I think that ship has sailed. Again, I'm sitting at the summit. It is now a common conversation to talk about sovereign AI, and really only in positive and glowing terms. And I feel like we missed out on never even trying to have a world in which we maybe collaborated, maybe in which this sort of technology was some sort of internationally governed utility. Or at least in a way in which we can distribute the economic benefits, across, many different ways. And again, at the end of the day, in the first 2 waves, like I said, the internet was a democratized good, but let's be real, America benefited from it, right? Financially, economically, and even in terms of the talent that came into our country and the kind of other companies that popped up. And now it's we've splintered all of it, which has all sorts of ramifications for information access, whether or not we can even have conversations with people across the world, because the kind of information they see is going to, be influenced by the kind of AI that's being built. The last part I'll add is it is actually only in the United States that we will see AI being built purely by private entities. So while Joey and I were bashing the fact that private companies have all this information, one of my biggest concerns is that sovereign AI everywhere else in the world is actually built and funded by the government, because there is no venture capital industry that looks like the US venture capital industry around the world. The government has to put in the money. So then what does it mean when Narendra Modi's government is the one pouring in hundreds of millions of dollars into this information ecosystem? Of course, that means his government will have power. Like, by Joey's argument, which I fully agree with, of course he's going to dictate to the models and the model companies how things should look, and because the dollars are coming out of his pocket. And again, like, we are not really having that conversation about sovereign AI because it is only being framed as a good, quote, almost like anti-American or anti-oligopolistic tool.
Joey?
There's a lot of good stuff there.
Yeah.
So I think that when it comes to, I have trouble deciding which area I want to talk about, but I think when it comes to foreign policy, like in technology through foreign policy, I think that a stronger America and stronger American capabilities strengthen our allied security and stability. And I think that's kind of like the bottom line of everything. I don't know. So I agree that the ship sailed. I think that we're on the path that we're on because of decisions that were made well before, any of us were probably, walking. And I do think that there are a lot of countries that missed the internet race. They missed that technology bubble. They also missed the chip building bubble as well. Europe largely completely skipped the chip building opportunity. And so I think they're looking at it now saying like, well, wait a minute, what do we do now? And their options are basically the United States, China, lesser extent Russia, and those are some. There are opportunities for them to develop their own technology and build a sovereign AI stack. But again, it's going to come down to money and energy. And I think a lot of the countries that are looking at doing these things, smaller countries anyway, just simply don't have the energy to compete. And frankly, I don't think Europe does either. I think we're talking about a lot of stuff about Europe, but ultimately at the end of the day, I don't believe that Europe just has the energy to be able to run the data centers that they need to be able to do to compete with China or the United States for that matter. And so I think you're going to see them going back to a very. Sorry, go ahead.
What about the idea that, just one last quick point before we wrap up, that Rumman said that this is a race to the bottom now? Do you think it is?
I don't know if it's a race to the bottom. I definitely think it's a race. I don't think that the arms race of the Cold War was necessarily a race to the bottom. It was just a race. I think that there's other things. There will be something in the future for us to argue about and say that we're doing incorrectly. But over this particular topic, I think it is a race. I think there's a lot of wealth tied to it. I think there's a lot of economic prosperity tied to it, and futures of whole countries are. This is part of something larger. You get into energy security, and you look at how China's approaching their energy security, how the United States is approaching their energy security, and how Europe is largely doing that. And I think this fits in with a larger picture of geopolitics, where technology fits in with geopolitics and the overlap between all of it. And you can't look at anything in a vacuum. This is part of a larger puzzle that, and I think there's going to be some agreements. There's definitely things that we've said tonight that I agree with. I think there ought to be more guardrails. There ought to be more safety. I'm not a big fan of bureaucracy. I think that when we tend to over-regulate things that we don't understand, it leads to stagnation of innovation. And I think that's one area where the United States has done exceptionally well over the last century, and where Europe has not done as well. And I think that as far as in the Middle East or other areas, they've relied largely on U.S. technology, and I think that's probably to their benefit over the last 50 years or so. And I think that as long as we continue developing these things and having these types of conversations, I think we'll end up in a happy medium. So no, I don't think it's a race to the bottom. I think that we'll probably find a medium somewhere that we all call it, kind of accept that that's enough stuff, and then we'll move on to some other technology that'll be developed tomorrow in somebody's garage somewhere.
You described it as a puzzle. It is a complex puzzle indeed. We're out of time, so we will leave it there. Dr. Rumman Chowdhury, CEO and founder of Humane Intelligence, and Joey Munoz, Strategic Political Advisor. Thank you both for your time here on Counterpoints. And thank you for tuning in to this episode of Counterpoints. Keep up to date with all of our debates and interviews on YouTube, subscribing to Al Arabiya English, and of course you can follow us on X and TikTok. We'll see you for the next debate.